Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up.
Monica Quartermaine has always been one of the most respected and beloved figures in Port Charles, a woman whose strength, intelligence, and loyalty have made her the true matriarch of the Quartermaine family. Over the years, she has faced loss, betrayal, heartbreak, and tragedy, yet she has remained the glue holding together one of the most powerful families in town. So when news began to spread about Monica's will being tampered with, fans immediately knew that this was going to spark one of the most dramatic and emotionally charged storylines on General Hospital. The Quartermaines are a family defined by money, power, and legacies, which makes Monica's estate a prime target for manipulation. But the shocking twist came when the truth was revealed about who actually changed her will, and the revelation sent ripples through not just the family, but all of Port Charles. For weeks, suspicions swirled as hints were dropped about irregularities in Monica's estate planning documents. Ned, Michael, Brooke Lynn, and Tracy all had their own theories, and each member of the family pointed fingers at one another. After all, the Quartermaines are notorious for scheming against each other when money or influence is involved, and Monica's fortune represented not just wealth but also the preservation of the family's name and influence in Port Charles. Still, there was something unusual about this situation. Monica, who has always been sharp and independent despite her age, had been very careful about ensuring her assets would be distributed according to her true wishes. The idea that she would suddenly change her will so dramatically raised red flags right away. Someone had interfered, but the question was who, and why? The possibility that Tracy might be behind the scheme seemed likely at first. Tracy Quartermaine has a history of manipulating family finances and has never been shy about protecting her own interests. Many viewers speculated that Tracy had pressured Monica into altering the will or even hired someone to forge documents. Tracy's ruthless streak made her an easy suspect, but as the story unfolded, it became clear that Tracy, while devious, wasn't responsible for this particular plot. In fact, Tracy herself expressed outrage when she discovered that Monica's original intentions were not reflected in the newly surfaced will, which immediately turned suspicion toward outsiders. This was no ordinary family squabble, it was something more sinister. Michael Corinthos was another name that came up frequently in speculation. As Monica's grandson, Michael has always been in line to inherit a large portion of the Quartermaine fortune. However, Michael's involvement in ELQ and his constant battle with Valentine Cassadine had already put him in the spotlight as someone who might want to solidify his financial control. The theory that Michael could have secretly influenced or even changed Monica's will without her knowledge was floated around, but the idea of Michael betraying his grandmother didn't sit right with many fans. Michael has made questionable decisions in the past, but his love and respect for Monica seemed genuine. Even so, the drama of him being unmasked as the culprit would have been explosive television. Yet, as more details emerged, it became apparent that Michael, too, was innocent. Then there was Brooke Lynn, who has been in a tug-of-war over her place in the Quartermaine family for years. Her complicated relationship with her father Ned, her constant need to prove herself, and her recent actions in business made her another viable suspect. If Brooke Lynn wanted to secure her place within the family, manipulating Monica's will could have been a bold way to do it. But much like Michael, Brooke Lynn has always shown a deep affection for Monica, who has often supported her even when others criticized her. The thought of Brooke Lynn betraying Monica didn't add up emotionally, though fans still debated it fiercely online, pointing out that Brooke Lynn has inherited her share of Quartermaine cunning. Still, when the truth came out, her name was cleared as well. The most shocking twist came when the identity of the person who changed Monica's will was finally revealed, and it wasn't a Quartermaine at all. Instead, it was someone who has long been lurking in the shadows of Port Charles, a character with a complex web of connections to the family and a motive driven by both greed and revenge. The revelation stunned viewers because it tied together not only the fate of Monica's fortune but also past grudges and unresolved rivalries that stretched back years. Suddenly, everything made sense, the inconsistencies in the paperwork, the unusual timing, and the way certain individuals had been circling around the Quartermaines just waiting for an opportunity. What made the reveal even more powerful was how personal it felt. This wasn't just about money, it was about betrayal, manipulation, and an attack on Monica's legacy. The culprit had gone after something sacred, Monica's final wishes and the Quartermaine family identity. For Monica, who has survived countless battles and endured more loss than most people could imagine, this was a violation that cut deep. And for the rest of the Quartermaines, the exposure of the truth meant dealing not only with the fallout of the scheme but also with their own guilt and paranoia about whether they should have seen it coming. The storyline also resonated with fans because it played into the long history of the Quartermaine family being torn apart by greed and deceit. From Edward's manipulations to Alan's scandals and Tracy's schemes, the Quartermaines have always been embroiled in drama involving money and power. Monica's will, as a symbol of her life's work and her devotion to family, represented both continuity and vulnerability. By targeting it, the person behind the change struck at the very heart of what the Quartermaines stand for, and reminded viewers why this family remains one of the most iconic in soap opera history. The air in the drawing room of the Quartermaine mansion was thick with the ghosts of arguments past and the cloying scent of old money and fresh-cut flowers. It was a room that had witnessed countless family revelations, betrayals, and the occasional attempted murder, but today's gathering promised a revelation of a different, yet equally devastating, order. The very fabric of the family, stitched together over decades with threads of love, greed, and necessity, was about to be torn asunder. The question hanging over them all was simple, yet its answer was poised to irrevocably shatter alliances. Who had dared to manipulate Monica Quartermaine in her most vulnerable state and change her last will and testament? Monica sat in a high-backed velvet armchair, a queen holding court in a kingdom she was being systematically stripped of. Her posture was ramrod straight, a testament to a lifetime of breeding and inherent strength, but her hands, clasped tightly in her lap, betrayed a fine tremor. The diagnosis had been a brutal blow, not just the cancer itself, but the particular cruelty of its timing, a thief of memory and agency at the very moment she needed them most. The early stages of cognitive decline, the doctors had called it. A polite, clinical term for the terrifying fog that would occasionally descend, blurring the lines between past and present, between lucidity and confusion. It was in one of these fog-ridden moments, a period she could only recall in fractured, dreamlike snippets, that a new will had been drafted and signed. The document was a monstrosity, a piece of legal work that disinherited her beloved son, Alan A.J. Quartermaine Jr., in favor of her nephew, Ned Ashton, and, more perplexingly, contained a sizable, convoluted trust for the perpetually troubled Jason Morgan. It made no sense. Monica's love for AJ was the one unwavering constant in her tumultuous life, the North Star by which she had navigated every other storm. To disinherit him was so fundamentally antithetical to her character that it screamed of foul play. The ensuing legal battle had been vicious, a public spectacle that had laid bare the family's deepest fissures. AJ's rage was a palpable force, a simmering volcano of betrayal and fury directed at everyone and no one. Ned, ever the pragmatic businessman, maintained a facade of bewildered innocence, while Jason, typically stoic, seemed mostly annoyed by the entire affair. The catalyst for this current, tense assembly was a name, whispered in the hallways of General Hospital, hinted at in anonymous notes, and finally, unearthed by a piece of digital forensics so simple it had been overlooked, a time-stamped security log from the mansion's own server. On the night the will was finalized, a user account with administrative privileges had accessed Monica's private digital files, including her financial portfolios and the drafts of her previous wills. The account belonged to someone with intimate knowledge of the family's digital infrastructure, someone who moved through the house with unquestioned access, someone Monica would have trusted implicitly. The log pointed a single, unassailable finger at Tracy Quartermaine. The revelation was, on the surface, almost too predictable. Tracy, Monica's longtime sister-in-law and rival, was a creature of pure, unadulterated avarice. Her entire life had been a masterclass in manipulation and financial maneuvering. To believe she had seized upon Monica's moment of weakness to rewrite the future of the Quartermaine fortune was entirely within the realm of possibility. It was a neat, tidy explanation, and for a brief, furious moment, AJ had been ready to eviscerate her with the evidence. But Tracy, when confronted with the cold, hard data, had not crumbled. Instead, she had laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that held no humor. "Oh, please," she'd sneered, her eyes sweeping over the assembled family with contempt. "If I were going to commit forgery and coercion, do you really think I'd be so clumsy? I'd have made myself the sole beneficiary and been sipping champagne on a non-extradition treaty island by now. This isn't my work. This is the work of an amateur with a grudge and a desperate need for cash." Her denial, delivered with such characteristic arrogance, had given them pause. Because Tracy was right. The will, while legally binding on its face, was a messy document. The trust for Jason was a bizarre, sentimental gesture that Tracy would never have concocted. She had no particular affection for him. The shift to Ned was clever, as it provided a plausible, less greedy-looking alternative, but it lacked Tracy's signature ruthless efficiency. It was, as she so bluntly put it, the work of an amateur. And so, the investigation had deepened, moving from the digital to the personal, peeling back the layers of trust and animosity that defined the Quartermaine dynasty. The focus shifted to access and motive. Who, besides Tracy, could have gotten close enough to a cognitively compromised Monica to exert such influence? Who knew the passwords, the schedules, the vulnerabilities? The list was distressingly short, and each name on it was a fresh wound. There was Ned himself, the apparent beneficiary. He was a Quartermaine through and through, but he possessed a certain decency that often put him at odds with the family's more cutthroat members. He was a businessman, not a monster. Yet, the pressure from his own branch of the family, from his mother, the formidable Lois, to secure their future, was immense. Could a desperate need to prove himself, to finally step out from under the shadow of his more flamboyant relatives, have driven him to this? There was the staff, of course. The long-serving butler, the personal nurse hired during Monica's illness. But financial gain on the scale seemed beyond their reach or ambition, and the complexity of the legal document suggested a mind familiar with the labyrinthine nature of Quartermaine affairs. Then there was Jason Morgan. The dark horse. The enforcer. The son who was not a son. His relationship with Monica was one of the most complex in Port Charles. She had loved his father, Alan, deeply, and in Jason, she saw both the ghost of the man she lost and the living reminder of the accident that had shattered the boy he once was, turning him into the hardened, taciturn man he was today. Monica had always held a torch for him, a maternal, guilt-ridden affection that he tolerated with a distant respect. But Jason had no need for Quartermaine money. His power and wealth, built on the dangerous foundation of the Port Charles underworld, were substantial and liquid. A trust fund was an irrelevance, a complication. His motive was the most opaque, and therefore, in some ways, the most suspicious. The grand halls of the Quartermaine mansion in Port Charles had always been a stage for drama, a sprawling testament to old money and older grudges. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen fireworks above polished marble floors, and portraits of stern ancestors gazed down with judgmental eyes. But on this crisp October morning in 2025, the air felt heavier than usual, thick with the scent of polished oak and unspoken accusations. The family had gathered in the drawing room, a space that had hosted christenings, betrayals, and more than a few shouted ultimatums. Today, it was the epicenter of a storm that had been brewing since Dr. Monica Quartermaine's quiet, unexpected death just weeks earlier. Monica, the steadfast heart of the Quartermaine dynasty, had passed in her sleep after a long battle with a lingering illness she had kept hidden from most. Her absence was a void that echoed through the mansion's corridors, where her laughter had once cut through the tension like a scalpel through flesh. Now, the room buzzed with the low hum of anticipation and resentment. Chairs had been arranged in a semicircle around a mahogany table, upon which rested a single, unassuming envelope, Monica's last will and testament. Sealing it was the weight of secrets, the kind that could unravel fortunes and families alike. At the head of the gathering stood Alexis Davis, the family's trusted attorney, her sharp eyes scanning the room like a hawk surveying prey. Dressed in a tailored black suit that spoke of professionalism laced with empathy, she cleared her throat, the sound slicing through the murmurs. "Thank you all for being here," she began, her voice steady but laced with the gravity of the moment. "Monica wanted this to be handled with dignity, and I intend to honor that." But she also made it clear that her wishes were to be read exactly as written, no interruptions. Seated around the table were the Quartermaines in all their fractured glory. Tracy Quartermaine, the iron-fisted matriarch of schemes and spite, perched on the edge of her velvet armchair like a queen defending her throne. Her silver hair was pulled into a severe chignon, and her lips were pressed into a line that could curdle milk. Tracy had always viewed the mansion as her domain, a fortress built on Edward's legacy and fortified by her own cunning. Losing Monica had been a blow, but it had also ignited her territorial instincts. She had already clashed with interlopers at the funeral, and now, her eyes darted suspiciously toward the newcomer in the room. Beside her sat Michael Corinthos, Monica's grandson, his broad shoulders tense beneath a crisp button-down shirt. Michael's life had been a tapestry of loyalties divided between the Corinthos crime world and the Quartermain boardroom battles. He had come expecting closure, perhaps a token inheritance to honor his grandmother's quiet pride in him. But his jaw was set, his dark eyes flicking toward the envelope with a mix of hope and dread. Willow, his wife, rested a hand on his knee, her touch a silent anchor in the brewing chaos. She, too, had grown to love Monica during her brief time as part of the family, and the loss still lingered in the shadows under her eyes. Drew Kane, Monica's once-lost son, wheeled himself into position with a scowl that could melt steel. The war hero and publishing magnate had returned to Port Charles after years away, only to find his place in the family contested at every turn. His recent humiliation at Monica's funeral, Tracy had unceremoniously wheeled him out of the chapel, deeming him an outsider, still burned like a fresh wound. Drew's hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white, as he glared at Tracy. "Let's just get this over with," he muttered, his voice a low rumble. "Monica wouldn't want us dragging this out like some bad opera." Across from him, Jason Morgan, Monica's adopted son and the family's enigmatic enforcer, leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his leather jacket. Jason had been the one to find Monica that fateful morning, her body peaceful in her bed, a half-read medical journal clutched in her hand. The image haunted him, a rare crack in his stoic facade. He had delivered the news to the family with his usual clipped efficiency, but inside, grief warred with the ghosts of his own fragmented past. Jason's blue eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the room, lingering on Britt Westbourne, who sat rigidly beside him. Britt, the brilliant but brittle doctor, had returned to Port Charles amid her own turmoil, and Monica's death had stirred old wounds. She fidgeted with the hem of her blouse, avoiding eye contact. And then there was the wild card, Veronica Langston, Monica's long-lost sister, portrayed with chilling poise by Erica Slezak. Veronica had burst into the Quartermain world like a thunderclap at the funeral, her arrival announced by a cryptic letter that had left Martin Gray, the family lawyer, stammering. Tall and elegant, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that mirrored Monica's, piercing green and unyielding, Veronica sat with the quiet confidence of someone who had waited decades for this moment. She wore a simple black dress that did little to hide the aura of entitlement radiating from her. Tracy had confronted her immediately upon arrival, hissing, "Who the hell are you, and what right do you have to this family?" Veronica's response had been a cool smile, "The right of blood, dear Tracy. Monica and I shared more than you ever knew." The room fell silent as Alexis broke the seal on the envelope, unfolding the crisp pages with deliberate care. The paper rustled like dry leaves in autumn, each sound amplifying the tension. "Monica revised this will shortly before her passing," Alexis announced, her tone neutral but her eyes betraying a flicker of surprise. "And she made changes that, well, let's proceed." She began reading, her voice carrying the weight of legacy. Bequests flowed like a river, charitable donations to General Hospital's pediatric wing, where Monica had spent her career saving lives, stocks and bonds distributed equitably among her grandchildren, a heartfelt note to Jason, acknowledging him as the son who had always been her rock, granting him a private trust for his shadowy endeavors, as she wryly put it. Michael received a significant share of ELQ shares, a nod to his efforts to bridge the family's corporate divides. Even Drew was remembered with a personal letter, tucked into the will, expressing Monica's regret for the years lost to his presumed death and a bequest of family heirlooms that symbolized his hard-won return. But it was the clause regarding the Quartermain mansion that ignited the powder keg. "To my beloved sister, Veronica Langston," Alexis read, pausing as gasps rippled through the room, "I bequeath the family estate at 72 Harborview Road, in full, with all furnishings, grounds, and historical artifacts intact. This home, which has witnessed our joys and sorrows, now passes to the bloodline we shared in secrecy. Tracy, you have managed it with your characteristic flair, but it is time for new guardianship." Tracy shot to her feet, her chair scraping back with a screech that echoed off the walls. "What the devil is this?" Monica would never, her words choked off as Veronica leaned forward, her expression serene but triumphant. The room erupted. Michael rose halfway, his hand outstretched in a placating gesture, while Willow whispered urgently in his ear. Drew's laugh was bitter, a bark that cut through the din of course. The prodigal aunt gets the keys to the kingdom. Monica always did love a plot twist. Jason pushed off the wall, his presence a calming force amid the storm. "Tracy, sit down. Let Alexis finish." But his eyes were on Veronica, calculating, always calculating. Britt, pale as porcelain, clutched the arm of her chair, her medical mind racing through the implications. Had Monica been coerced? Blackmailed? The will felt too neat, too pointed. Alexis raised her voice above the fray. "There's more. Monica included a codicil, dated just 3 weeks ago, executed in the presence of Martin Gray." At the mention of Martin, Tracy's eyes narrowed to slits. Martin Gray, the slippery lawyer with a penchant for the Quartermain's dirty work, had been notably absent from the reading. Whispers had circulated that he was handling complications from Monica's estate, but now, suspicion bloomed like a dark flower. As the reading concluded, the family dispersed into fractious clusters. Tracy cornered Alexis in the hallway, her voice a venomous whisper. "This is fraud. Monica was fading, she wouldn't have disinherited me without reason. Find out who tampered with that document." Alexis nodded wearily, knowing full well the legal quagmire ahead. Michael pulled Jason aside in the garden, the autumn leaves crunching underfoot like brittle bones. "You were closest to her at the end. Did she say anything about this, sister? Veronica shows up out of nowhere, and now she gets the mansion?" Jason shook his head, his jaw tight. "Monica mentioned a sibling once, in passing. Said it was a family secret buried with their parents. But this feels off." Drew, overhearing from his vantage point on the terrace, wheeled closer. "Off? It's a goddamn heist. And Martin's involved, that weasel never does anything without an angle." The 3 men, bound by blood and battles, formed an uneasy alliance in that moment, their shared grief forging a temporary truce. Meanwhile, in the library, Veronica sipped tea with the poise of a victor, her fingers tracing the spines of leather-bound volumes that chronicled Quartermain triumphs. Britt entered hesitantly, drawn by curiosity and a doctor's instinct for hidden ailments. "Ms. Langston, if you don't mind." "Monica was my patient briefly. She never mentioned you." Veronica's smile was a blade sheathed in silk. "Monica and I had our reasons for silence, Dr. Westbourne. Secrets are the mortar that holds families like this together, or tears them apart." Britt pressed, sensing evasion, but Veronica deflected with tales of a shared childhood in a distant European clinic, where the sisters had been separated by scandal. It was a story laced with half-truths, enough to intrigue but not satisfy. As the day wore on, Port Charles itself seemed to hold its breath. News of the will's contents leaked like smoke from a chimney, fueling gossip at Kelly's Diner and the Floating Rib. Carly Corinthos, Michael's mother and a force of nature in her own right, stormed the mansion by evening, her blonde hair windswept from a frantic drive. "This is insane. Monica raised me like a daughter in this house. How dare some ghost from the past swoop in?" She confronted Veronica in the solarium, the glass walls framing a sunset that bled red across the harbor. Willow trailed behind, ever the peacemaker, but even she couldn't quell the rising tide. Sonny Corinthos, Carly's ex and Michael's father, arrived soon after, his presence a shadow that darkened doorways. The mob boss had respected Monica, seeing in her the steel spine that mirrored his own. "Jason," he growled in the study, pouring scotch with hands that never trembled, "you think this is legit? Or is someone playing us?" Jason, nursing a beer, met his old friend's gaze. "Legit on paper. But Monica? She was sharp till the end. If she changed it, she had a reason. If not..." The unspoken hung heavy: murder, manipulation, malice. The revelation came not in a blaze of confrontation, but in the quiet hours after midnight, when secrets slither from their hiding places. Tracy, unable to sleep, rifled through Monica's private desk in the study. Drawers yielded letters yellowed with age, medical files, and a locked box that yielded to her determined pick. Inside was a draft of the original will, dated months earlier, leaving the mansion unequivocally to the Quartermain Trust under Tracy's stewardship. But scrawled in the margins, in Monica's elegant script, was a note: "Consult Martin revisions. Trust no one fully." Dawn broke with Tracy summoning Martin Gray to the mansion under threat of disbarment. The lawyer arrived disheveled, his usual urbane charm frayed at the edges. They met in the sunroom, where morning light filtered through lace curtains like interrogators' beams. "You were the executor," Tracy accused, slamming the draft will on the table. "Monica trusted you." "What did you do?" Martin adjusted his tie, sweat beading on his brow. "Tracy, When the truth finally came out, jaws dropped across Port Charles. The person who changed Monica's will was none other than Drew Kane. On the surface, Drew has always been seen as one of the more honorable men in town, someone who values loyalty and family. He has been a hero, a father, and a man who has tried to live by integrity despite the chaos of his past. But what made this revelation so gut-wrenching was the fact that Drew's involvement wasn't born out of malice, it was born out of desperation. Somewhere along the line, Drew had convinced himself that tampering with Monica's will was the only way to protect the future of his daughter Scout and to ensure that the Quartermaine legacy stayed intact in his own way. For Drew, the Quartermaine name has always been complicated. He is not Alan's biological son but has long been considered part of the family. Monica has loved him as her own, yet Drew has often felt like an outsider, forever standing in Jason's shadow. Even after Jason's presumed death, Drew still carried the weight of comparison, as if he could never quite fill the role of the good son in the eyes of the family. That insecurity festered quietly beneath the surface, and as Drew struggled with his business interests and his strained relationships, the temptation to secure a greater share of Monica's estate grew too strong to ignore. He believed he was acting in the best interest of his daughter, but in reality, he allowed his fears and need for control to push him toward a choice that would ultimately cost him dearly. The fallout of this revelation was immediate and devastating. Monica was heartbroken. For all the betrayals she had endured over the years, this one struck on a deeper level. Drew was supposed to be someone she could trust, a man she had defended when others questioned his place in the family. To learn that he had gone behind her back and manipulated her was a wound she didn't know how to process. For Monica, it wasn't about the money, it was about her wishes being disregarded, her autonomy being stolen. She had worked hard to craft a legacy that honored all the members of her family, both living and those lost, and Drew's interference made her feel as though her voice had been silenced. The rest of the Quartermaines reacted with their usual mixture of outrage and self-interest. Tracy wasted no time in declaring Drew a traitor, and she relished the opportunity to remind everyone that she had suspected something was off all along. Ned, meanwhile, was furious, not only because of Drew's betrayal but also because of the potential damage to ELQ. With Valentine Cassadine always circling like a shark, the Quartermaines could not afford to be distracted by internal sabotage. Michael, too, was torn. On one hand, he felt betrayed by someone he considered family, but on the other, he understood Drew's reasoning in wanting to secure Scout's future. Brooke Lynn, surprisingly, was one of the few who expressed compassion, pointing out that Drew's motives, while misguided, were rooted in love for his child. The storyline also brought Sam McCall into the spotlight. As Scout's mother, Sam was appalled by Drew's actions. She had always admired his strength of character, but this betrayal forced her to question whether he was truly the man she believed him to be. For Sam, it wasn't just about the money, it was about trust and what kind of example Drew was setting for their daughter. Their already strained relationship hit another low point, with Sam torn between protecting Scout and distancing herself from Drew's choices. The tension between them created ripple effects with Jason's memory hanging heavily in the background. After all, Jason, despite all his flaws, would never have betrayed Monica in this way. What made Drew's revelation even more tragic was the fact that Monica herself might have eventually given him what he wanted had he simply been honest. Monica has always been fiercely protective of her children and grandchildren, and had Drew come to her directly with his concerns about Scout's future, she would likely have made adjustments to ensure her granddaughter was taken care of. But by going behind Monica's back and tampering with the will, Drew undermined her trust and turned what could have been a conversation into a scandal. It was the secrecy and the deception that broke Monica's heart, more than the actual redistribution of her estate. As word spread beyond the Quartermaine mansion, the residents of Port Charles reacted in their own ways. Carly was quick to voice her outrage, siding firmly with Monica and lambasting Drew for his betrayal. Her relationship with Drew had already been complicated, and this revelation further cemented her distrust. Sonny, ever the pragmatist, warned that the Quartermaines needed to handle this scandal quietly before it weakened their standing in the community. Valentine, of course, seized the opportunity to exploit the chaos, knowing that the Quartermain's internal strife could only work to his advantage in the ongoing battle for ELQ.